Hey, it's Taskmark11 with something a little different than usual. My Xenoblade Blade Buff series, which I will be continuing by the way, got me thinking about similar balance change ideas for other games. So the first thing I thought of was giving a Lunatic / Maddening mode to Fire Emblem Echoes SoV, my favorite Fire Emblem game for everything except for gameplay because it's entirely lacking in challenge. So this will be going over some general ideas that could make the game more challenging and maybe take a bit more advantage of maps, because the map design in a lot of cases, it's not that the maps themselves are bad, but that they're just very underutilized. You have really big maps and not a lot of enemies on them, and enemies are mostly clustered on them as well. So I'll mostly just be talking about general things, not map-specific things. If this goes over well, I'll do a follow-up doing some more map-specific ideas maybe. And apologies for video quality. I am not set up for recording off 3DS. I haven't recorded things from the 3DS in years, and I'm not set up for it. So, the first thing is going to be almost every enemy has no item. This makes no sense, and this is a really easy fix that can bulk up enemies or make them a bit tougher, and that's just simply giving every enemy an item, some kind of default item that if they don't have any kind of strong equipment, they will at least have either a leather shield or an iron weapon of their weapon class. So that's immediately going to buff almost every enemy in the game. The next thing is, again, enemies are really weak. So we don't want stat bloat. Stat bloat is awful. It was awful in Awakening, awful in Three Houses. Stat bloat is just a really bad way of making things more challenging, because it doesn't make things more challenging, it just makes you need more stats. So we don't want stat bloat, but we do want enemies to have very slightly better stats, because they're way too weak. So I'd say for Acts 1 and 2, give +1 to all enemies. For Act 3, +2 levels to all enemies. And for Act 4 and beyond, +3 levels to all enemies, or maybe just keep it at 2. Maybe 2 is enough. In most cases, +2 levels is really only going to add 1 stat to most stats and not even affect half of them. So I feel like that's enough in most cases to make them just very slightly stronger on top of giving them better weapons. We could also have a lot of enemies that could do with using rings. There's almost no rings found on enemies in the game. And in most cases, they're just dropped rings. Enemies could have rings that don't drop. What a concept. And then the biggest thing I feel is that enemies need a luck stat. Almost every single enemy in the entire game has 0 luck, which means you get to crit on them for free, even with low crit rate characters. So, really simple fix for this. Give a 20 to 30% luck growth to every enemy, except for monsters. I feel like it makes sense for monsters to have 0 luck, so keep them with being really easy to crit. But for regular human enemies, either 20 or 30% luck growth to all of them, so that it's not too high, not high enough that they can have their own crit rates, but high enough that you will not crit on them for free. The next thing is there needs to be more enemies per map. It's not so much in the early maps, maybe just 2 to 3 more enemies, but then starting at Sophia Castle, there should really be some more enemies to deal with, because the maps are very barren and just very underutilized. So for Sophia Castle, for example, this is one of the few map-specific things I'll go into. You have the entire left side and upper right side of the map with nothing there. So we could add a couple archers to the middle left side so that it's more symmetrical, where you have archers on the middle right side, and then maybe some soldiers up onto the top right, and Pegasus Knights. This is a map where it would really make sense to have some Pegasus Knights and then Claire could get some use in having to deal with them, matching mobility with mobility. So maybe 2 Pegasus Knights on this map. I'll just go over a few more map-specific examples, and then just do more on that if anyone wants a follow-up on this at some point. This one, we could have a couple Pegasus Knights there, and mercenaries out in the front more, because this is another really barren map. The entire lower half of it is just useless. So fill it in with some enemies that are, I don't know, assume they're scouts. They're supposed to alert the fortress. For Celica maps in general, I feel like you don't need too much to add enemy placement, just increase enemy number, because the maps are already annoying enough, and there's no real better way to put enemy placement on. But for all maps, the maps are especially noticeable with how barren they are, because you have really big maps and very little enemy placement on them. So for Desay's Fortress, for example, have a few enemies off to the smaller fortress thing, I forget what it's called, the supplies to the right side, have some enemies there, and a few enemies in the forest. For the sluice gate, have some knights, armor knights there, because it is entirely mages. There's no reason to have such little variety on this map. Add a few knights blocking the entrance. For Rigel, for the border crossing, add whole waves. We need at least two waves of paladins added on there, because this is a map that they show in the cutscene. There's all these enemies at the border. It makes sense to have a ton of enemies at the border. Looks like it's a massive fight, and then the actual map itself, there's barely anything there. So add 2 whole sets of enemies. There's currently like 3 sets of enemies there, or 4. There's the 3 main sets, 1 on each side, 1 in the middle, and then the boss set. So I'd say add 2 more sets of enemies there to take more advantage of how big the space is. Rigel Forest, add a wave of enemies down in the southwest. And this is the big one. Rigel Plains. Have this depend on if you get to recruit Zeke or not. If you do not recruit him and if you fight him, then have 2 sets of enemies come out, 1 for each side. But then if you, actually no, make this the same regardless, but have it, if you're fighting against him, then have 1 of these sets of enemies that come out be weaker. If you get him as green, then have 2 sets of enemies come out, 2 whole waves of another set of enemies of what's currently out. There's currently the Zeke wave and the Jerome wave. So have 2 more waves of equal number of enemies. So if you get Zeke as a green unit, then the second and third waves of enemies will be on par with Jerome's units. If Zeke is an enemy, then 1 of the sets of enemies will come out being as strong as Zeke's units. And then the last map-specific idea I'll go over is for the Rudolph Fight. Have a few Pegasus and Falcon Knights. Have a few Falcon Knights up there that come down and attack you. Have 4 Barons out at the front that you have to get through first before you get into the castle grounds. Have 2 Gold Knights on each side. And have Rudolph not come and attack you until more of the enemies around him have been engaged, because it ends too early when he comes out and attacks you right in the center of the map. It doesn't make sense to have him attack you in the center of the map. Have him positioned in the far right corner of the map or far left corner of the map instead, so that he won't be engaged as easily. And that way you have to deal with more of the map instead of just going straight for the boss kill. So again, I could go over some more map-specific ideas if this video is received well and people want to see more of that. But that's it so far for ideas for what could be done to give Fire Emblem Echoes an actual hard mode. So if you want to see more of this, then let me know, or at least like the video so I can see that people want to see more of this. So, see you next time.